A group of tourists mocked the new guy on royal guard duty, pushing him to his breaking point with insults about fake soldiers and costume wearers. But when he finally spoke, revealing his combat medals and battlefield heroism, their arrogance shattered instantly. Here's how a decorated war veteran taught them the true meaning of the uniform. The summer sun beat down on the paved courtyard of Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. Tourists gathered in eager clusters, cameras raised and voices humming with excitement. Among the sea of visitors, Sergeant Michael Townend stood at his post-perfect statue dressed in the iconic scarlet tunic and bearskin cap that had become synonymous with British tradition. Though this was only his third day as a royal guard, his posture betrayed nothing of his newness. His back was ramrod straight, shoulders squared, chin level, and eyes fixed forward in unwavering discipline. At 28, Townend cut an impressive figure. 6 years in the British Army had honed his body into a weapon, while his mind carried the weight of experiences most civilians couldn't comprehend. The medals hidden beneath his ceremonial uniform told stories of courage under fire, split-second decisions that had saved lives, and nights spent beneath Afghan stars listening to the distant thunder of artillery. But here, in the heart of London, that life seemed a world away. "Look at that one," a voice cut through the general murmur of the crowd. "He's new. Doesn't even have the stance quite right." Michael didn't flinch, didn't even allow his eyes to track the source of the comment. Though he could see the speaker in his peripheral vision, a tall man with expensive sunglasses perched on his carefully styled hair. His designer clothes seemed to announce his wealth to anyone paying attention. Blake Thompson, though Townend didn't know his name, yet was pointing directly at him, surrounded by 3 friends who laughed too loudly at his observation. "Bet I can make this one crack," Blake continued, his American accent carrying across the courtyard. "The new ones always break first." Townend remained motionless, his focus unwavering. He had endured Taliban gunfire in Helmand province. A tourist's taunts were hardly worth the energy of a reaction. Still, something in the man's tone, the casual arrogance, the assumption of superiority sent a familiar tension through Townend's shoulders. He had encountered men like this before, in other contexts, men who viewed others as entertainment, obstacles, or props in their personal narratives. Seriously, Blake's voice grew louder, clearly intended for Townend to hear. "What's with the fuzzy hats? They look ridiculous, like something from a costume shop." His friends snickered, one of them raising his phone to start recording. Townend could see the red light blinking in his peripheral vision. Another social media moment in the making. Another attempt to provoke a reaction for likes and shares. Behind his mask of military discipline, Townend sighed internally. It wasn't his first encounter with disrespectful tourists, and it certainly wouldn't be his last. The commanders had warned all new guards about this particular hazard of the job. "They'll try to make you laugh, make you flinch, make you speak," Captain Williams had said during orientation. "Remember, you're not just a man in that moment, you're the living embodiment of centuries of tradition." Townend stood, unmoving as stone, as Blake Thompson took another step closer, his expensive cologne wafting through the summer air. In the distance, a tour guide was explaining the history of the palace to an attentive group, her voice rising and falling with practiced cadence. Children chased pigeons across the courtyard. Life continued its normal rhythm around them, but Townend could feel the peculiar tension that precedes conflict, the subtle shift in the atmosphere when someone decides to make trouble. Blake Thompson smiled the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and stepped directly into Townend's line of sight. "Hey, toy soldier," he said, snapping his fingers inches from Townend's face. "Anyone home?" And so it began another test of Townend's discipline. Behind his impassive expression, memories of far greater challenges flickered through his mind. Sand-filled bunkers, Night patrols through hostile villages, the weight of a wounded comrade across his shoulders. If those hadn't broken him, this man certainly wouldn't. What? Blake didn't know what none of the gathered tourists could possibly guess was exactly who stood before them, hidden in plain sight beneath the ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guard. Blake wasn't just any tourist. He was entitled enough to believe the world existed for his amusement. This wasn't their first performance. In Paris, they had mocked a street mime until he broke character. In Rome, they'd posed inappropriately with ancient statues. Their YouTube channel had amassed a following of viewers who delighted in watching boundaries being pushed. Remember the tomb of the unknown soldier? Chuckled Ryan, adjusting his designer sunglasses. Those guards couldn't take a joke either. Blake smirked, brushing an invisible speck from his $5,000 jacket. His father's hedge fund had made certain that consequences were something that happened to other people. Josh, newer to the group, glanced around uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just check out the changing of the guard and move on," he suggested. "Boring," Blake cut him off. "We didn't fly all the way to London to follow some tourist checklist. What's more authentic than these palace puppets?" An elderly American couple nearby exchanged disapproving glances. Blake noticed and deliberately raised his voice. "I mean, what century are we in? Grown men playing dress-up while taxpayers foot the bill." Blake positioned himself directly in front of Townend, blocking visitors' photos. "Do you think they're selected based on how dumb they look in these hats, or is it whoever can stand still the longest without having to pee?" A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why are they being mean to the guard, Mummy?" The mother pulled her son closer. "Because some people never learn proper manners, darling." Blake turned, fixing her with a cold stare. "Proper manners? Like wasting money on outdated traditions? Like pretending these guys are soldiers instead of tourist attractions?" Two elderly men in blazers adorned with military pins exchanged glances from the edge of the crowd, their expressions darkening with disapproval. As Blake played to the cameras now pointed in his direction, something shifted in the atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. Those closest to Townend noticed it first, an imperceptible change in his breathing, a newly focused quality to his gaze. Not breaking discipline, not yet, but preparation. "What's wrong, guard? Truth hurts." Blake's voice dripped with mockery. "Or are you just following orders like a good little soldier? Standing here letting an American walk all over your so-called dignity because someone with braids on their shoulder told you to?" The taller veteran stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "That's more than enough, son." Blake turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Stay out of this, Grandpa. This is between me and the statue here." "No," the veteran replied evenly. "It's between you and every person who's ever worn that uniform with honor, including me." Blake rolled his eyes dramatically. "Honor, please. What's honorable about being a tourist attraction? What's honorable about standing still while people mock you to your face?" He turned back to Townend, delivering what he thought would be his final insult. "Real soldiers fight for something. Real soldiers stand for something. You're just hiding behind tradition because you couldn't cut it where it actually matters." It was the word hiding that did it. After everything else, the insults about courage, about service, about worth it, was the accusation of hiding that finally crossed the line. Sergeant Michael Townend moved. The movement was precise, controlled, economical, not the reaction of someone losing control, but of someone making a calculated decision. He took one step forward, coming to attention not in the ceremonial posture of the Royal Guard, but in the crisp, no-nonsense stance of a combat veteran. "Sergeant Michael Townend," he stated, his voice clear and carrying, "formerly of the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Distinguished Service Cross recipient for actions under enemy fire in Helmand Province, 2018. The courtyard fell completely silent. Blake's mouth opened, then closed, no clever retort forthcoming. "I've carried wounded men through gunfire," Townend continued, his words measured and precise, without a hint of the anger that would have been justified. "Made life-or-death decisions under impossible conditions, and buried friends who gave everything for the uniform you're mocking. Now I stand here not because I couldn't cut it elsewhere, but because I consider it an honor to represent centuries of tradition and sacrifice." Blake took an involuntary step backward, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in the face of authentic authority. The veterans nodded in silent approval, recognizing the controlled power in Townend's stance. "Here, the men and women who wear this uniform," Townend continued, "are all combat veterans. Many have seen action in the world's most dangerous regions. We stand guard not because we're playing at being soldiers, but because we've earned the right to represent something greater than ourselves." He gestured to the palace behind him. "This uniform isn't a costume. It's a symbol of service that spans centuries." The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the children, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood still. Blake stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporated under Townend's unwavering gaze. "In Helmand Province," Townend said, "my patrol was ambushed. I carried my wounded captain 2 miles to extraction under enemy fire. The medal they gave me sits in a drawer because the real reward was bringing everyone home alive." He gestured to the palace behind him. "I stand here not because I couldn't handle combat, but because after seeing the worst humanity offers, I chose to represent its best traditions." Taller veterans stepped forward, nodding in recognition. "Royal Marines, Falklands Campaign," he introduced himself. "And my friend here was SAS. We know exactly what that uniform means, son." Blake's friends had backed away, embarrassment written across their faces. Ethan had lowered his camera. The recording stopped. Ryan studied his expensive shoes, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Josh had already retreated to the edge of the crowd. Blake began, his voice uncharacteristically small. "I didn't know you were actually—" "That's the point," Townend interrupted, not unkindly. "You made assumptions based on what you saw on the surface. A ceremonial uniform doesn't mean ceremonial service." The second veteran stepped forward. "The Queen's Guard isn't some tourist attraction, young man. It's a posting of honor given to soldiers who've proven themselves in the field. Every man standing guard has earned their place through blood and sacrifice." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as this information registered. Many tourists looked at the other guards with new eyes, suddenly seeing not ceremonial figures but combat veterans continuing their service in a different form. As the truth sank in, the crowd's mood shifted. A young girl pushed forward through the crowd, looking up at Townend with wide eyes. "Did you really save your friends in the war?" she asked. Townend's expression softened as he looked down at her. "I did my job, just like everyone else wearing this uniform. We look out for each other." "Are you a hero?" the girl pressed. Townend replied gently, "The heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I'm just someone who tries to live up to their example." The girl's mother approached, taking her daughter's hand. "Thank you for your service," she said quietly, "and for your patience today." Others in the crowd began to echo the sentiment, murmuring thanks and apologies. Some glared pointedly at Blake, who seemed to shrink with each passing moment. "I think," the taller veteran said, addressing Blake directly, "you owe this soldier an apology." Blake shifted uncomfortably, the weight of dozens of judgmental stares pressing down on him. His carefully constructed persona of confident provocateur had crumbled, leaving only an embarrassed young man who had severely misjudged his target. Blake began, then cleared his throat. "I apologize. I didn't understand what the uniform represented. Townend nodded once, accepting the apology without commentary. His face had returned to its professional mask, though not with the ceremonial blankness of before. This was the controlled expression of a soldier who had said what needed saying and nothing more. "Perhaps next time," Townend suggested quietly, "you might consider that traditions endure for reasons beyond your immediate understanding." The veterans exchanged approving glances. The taller one stepped forward again, addressing the crowd rather than just Blake. "What you've witnessed today is the character that makes these guards special, not just their discipline in remaining silent, but their dignity when finally speaking. What would you have done if you had witnessed these boys disrespecting a royal guard? Would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Let us know in the comments below. If this story taught you something new about the royal guards, hit that like button and share it with someone who might appreciate this perspective. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden depths behind familiar traditions. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Check out our other videos appearing on screen now, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time with a brand new story.